For 3 years, the Islamic terrorists of ISIS have brought death and destruction to the Middle East. They have committed genocide against Christians and Yazidis, and they've unleashed terror on the world. How did the deadly group get started, and how do we defeat it? Gary Lane brings us this look at the origins of the Islamic State.
Before ISIS was as strong as it is today, it was a network of Islamic extremists known as al-Tawhid, al-Jihad, and it was led by this man, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Zarqawi was a Jordanian-born Bedouin of Palestinian heritage. He was an illiterate petty criminal. In 1992, the Jordanian government sent him to jail after guns and explosives were found in his home. There he became radicalized and attempted to enlist fellow prisoners in a plot to overthrow the Jordanian monarchy.
To the best of my knowledge, he wasn't on anybody's radar. That was about 3 years before things really got going with al-Qaeda.
After his release from prison, al-Zarqawi set up a terrorist training camp in Herat, Afghanistan. By the middle of 2002, the CIA suspected him of establishing a similar camp and a poison gas lab in northern Iraq, in a town called Kermal. In March 2003, Zarqawi survived a U.S. airstrike on the camp. Then he moved farther south. After the United States disbanded Saddam's army, Zarqawi enlisted help from some of the former Iraqi officers and operatives. Al-Zarqawi became the symbol of the Sunni resistance, and other extremists followed his example, carrying out many more attacks. In January 2004, the U.S. reportedly intercepted a letter from Zarqawi to the al-Qaeda leadership, saying the best way to defeat the United States in Iraq is to incite a sectarian war among Muslims that will, quote, awaken the sleepy Sunnis. In March 2004, U.S. contractor Nick Berg was beheaded on video. The CIA said Berg's executioner was none other than Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. In June 2006, Zarqawi was tracked down and killed by a U.S. airstrike. Following Zarqawi's death, al-Qaeda Iraq morphed into the Islamic State, and quiet cleric Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi became its leader. They launched a wave of deadly explosives and car bomb attacks in Mosul and Baghdad.
One of the worst things that happened was that after we invaded Iraq and handled the surge and were in pretty good shape, President Obama effectively pulled out very quickly and left things in chaos.
In April 2013, Baghdadi announced his group would expand into Syria. And so the Islamic State in Iraq became ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. By December 2014, ISIS had fielded more than 30,000 jihadists and occupied territory in 1/3 of Iraq and 1/4 of Syria. Former CIA Director Woolsey is critical of how U.S. intelligence facts about ISIS were altered to fit a political narrative.
Well, this administration starts with a narrative, as they call it, a story, and then they try to fiddle around with the facts to make them fit the narrative rather than changing the narrative to match the real facts. As a result of that, I think it's fair to say that ISIS has grown in importance.
So how can the United States defeat ISIS? Former CIA analyst Fred Flight says the U.S. and Russian air campaign alone will not do it.
We know from history you can't win wars from the air. But even if we wiped out ISIS on the ground, it's the ideology that has to be fought.
Also, the ISIS money supply must be choked off.
It's a terrorist organization that holds territory. It is able to generate money from oil. It's able to generate money from illegal trade. And it probably has supporters from Gulf states who support these radical jihadists, the same people who have been supporting al-Qaeda over the years.
The Sunni Grand Mufti of Syria agrees. When I met Sheikh Hassan in Damascus earlier this year, I asked what would it take to defeat ISIS and end the civil war in Syria.
All religions must come together and see where this financing is coming from for these extremists and stop it. Many Muslim leaders, they have connections and their wealth is related to the fighting. They are financing it.
Recent leaks of Hillary Clinton emails by WikiLeaks show the former Secretary of State knew who was funding the Islamic State. In this August 2014 communication with her campaign chairman John Podesta, Clinton says, "We need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia. which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region. And the war against ISIS will not end with the liberation of Mosul.
It has become a powerful organization, a lethal organization, and one that's going to take a fair amount of fighting to destroy in its home court, so to speak, in Syria and Iraq. And then it also has to be defeated in all of our cities and states and neighborhoods in the U.S. and elsewhere. We cannot just ignore it. It's going to get worse.
Gary Lane, CBN News.